It is the summer of 1348, and you are standing in a country that is not at war. There is no invasion, no rebellion, no famine on the horizon. And yet within a matter of months, whole towns will begin to empty out. A man can wake up healthy in the morning and be dead within 3 days. A village can lose half its people before a single month has passed. Priests will die faster than anyone can bury them. Fields will go unharvested, and church bells will ring themselves out because there is no one left to answer them. Within 2 years, something close to half of England will be gone. Not from an army, not from hunger, but from something nobody can see and nobody can stop. It arrives by ship, sometime before the 24th of June, 1348, docking at a small harbor near Weymouth called Melcombe. A chronicle written by the Grey Friars marks this as the exact moment England's disaster begins. The ship had sailed from Gascony in southwestern France, part of a much older chain of infection that had already crossed from Central Asia along the trade routes of the Silk Road, through the Black Sea port of Kaffa, into the Mediterranean, and up through France before ever touching English soil. From Weymouth it spreads into Dorset, then Devon, then Somerset, then north into Bristol, one of England's busiest cities. A chronicler at the time writes that the plague left the countryside almost void of people. Gloucester tries to refuse entry to anyone coming from Bristol. It changes nothing. By autumn of that same year, the disease reaches London. England begins 1348 with somewhere around 6 million people. Within 2 years, that number will fall toward 3 million. To understand why it killed so fast, you need to understand what it actually was. The bacterium responsible is called Yersinia pestis, and it usually spread through the bite of infected fleas that lived on black rats, rats that traveled constantly through grain shipments, cloth, and timber in every English market town. Once inside a person, the bacteria moved through the lymphatic system, and within days the lymph nodes in the groin, armpit, or neck would swell into hard, agonizing lumps called buboes. This was the bubonic form. But England also saw the pneumonic form, an infection of the lungs that spread directly through breath, needing no flea and no rat at all, only closeness to another infected person. And this version killed even faster. A third, rarer form drove the bacteria straight into the bloodstream, leaving almost no gap at all between the first fever and death, often accompanied by patches of blackened skin. Physicians of the time bled their patients, prescribed herbs, prayed over them, and had absolutely no explanation for why one household could lose 4 people while the family next door remained completely untouched. By winter, the disease is no longer confined to the coast. It travels every road, river, and trade route England had built over centuries, following merchants, pilgrims, and grain carts. Winchester Falls, Salisbury Falls, Oxford Falls. It reaches London by 3 separate routes at once, and once inside, it finds ideal conditions. Narrow streets running with raw sewage, overcrowded housing, and one of the busiest ports in northern Europe. Burial pits are dug outside the city walls at Smithfield, because the parish churchyards have simply run out of space. Archaeologists excavating these pits centuries later would find bodies stacked 5 deep, buried with unusual care despite the chaos, suggesting that even amid catastrophe, people tried to preserve some shred of dignity for the dead. The English Church, at this time, was not simply a religious institution, it was the entire administrative backbone of ordinary life, recording births and deaths, running hospitals, administering last rites. And the plague killed its priests in extraordinary numbers, because their duties demanded direct contact with the dying. In the Diocese of York, historians estimate that close to half of all parish clergy died within 2 years. The Bishop of Bath in Wells issued an emergency order permitting dying people to confess to any layperson, even a woman, if no priest could be found, a genuinely radical concession for the time. People watched their priests die at exactly the same rate as everyone else, despite their supposed closeness to God, and that single observation planted a doubt in the medieval mind that would take generations to fully surface, eventually feeding into movements that questioned the authority of the Church itself. Nearly 9 in 10 people in England lived not in cities but in small rural villages, and this is where the plague-ass weight fell heaviest. A village of 100 people might lose 60 of them within weeks, and unlike a city, a village had no surplus population to absorb that loss. When the ploughman died, the fields went unworked. When the miller died, no grain was ground. On some estates belonging to the Bishop of Worcester, tenant mortality reached as high as 80%, while a neighboring manor lost fewer than 1 in 5. More than 1,000 English villages would eventually vanish completely between 1350 and 1500, swallowed back into forest and farmland, their fields and boundaries surviving while the people who had worked them for generations simply disappeared. Those who could afford to run did, landowners retreated to distant estates, bishops moved between residences, merchants shut their doors and fled to quieter towns. But flight often just carried the disease into places that had so far escaped it. For the poor, the laborers, the serfs, there was no option but to stay and watch it move through their homes. Chroniclers in multiple, unconnected counties recorded the same disturbing pattern. Parents abandoning sick children, children abandoning sick parents, the ordinary bonds of family loyalty snapping under pressure they had never been designed to withstand. What came after the dying was almost as strange as the dying itself. England had, before 1348, far more workers than available work, which kept wages low and gave landlords enormous leverage. After the plague, that arithmetic flipped completely, labor became scarce, and scarcity is leverage. Surviving workers began demanding double, even triple their old wages. In some Oxfordshire manors, ploughmen demanded 5 times what they had earned before the outbreak. King Edward III responded in 1349 with the Ordinance of Labourers, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels by law, followed 2 years later by the Statute of Labourers, which made it a criminal offence to pay or accept wages above the old rate. Courts prosecuted hundreds of violations every single year, and wages kept rising anyway. A law can punish a person, it cannot reverse the arithmetic of mass death. Wealth offered no real protection, bishops died, knights died. Even King Edward's own daughter, Joan, died of plague in the summer of 1348 while traveling through France for her wedding, despite being moved to a small village specifically to avoid the outbreak. Modern genetic research has since suggested that certain immune-related gene variants may have offered some people partial natural resistance to Yersinia pestis, meaning survival was, in part, a matter of biology nobody in the 14th century could have understood. All they experienced was a pattern with no visible logic: a husband dead, his wife untouched, one child taken, the other spared, a priest who tended the dying for months without ever falling ill, replaced by a younger man who died within a week of arriving. By 1351 the first wave had passed, but the plague was far from finished with England. It returned in 1361, killing roughly 1 in 5 of those who remained, then again in 1369, and again in 1375, continuing in recurring waves for more than a century. England's population would not fully recover to its pre-plague level for well over 100 years, by some estimates closer to 200. That enormous, empty gap in the population reshaped the entire country. Rents collapsed because landlords had no leverage left. Surviving peasants inherited land that would once have taken generations to acquire. Resentment over the wage law simmered for 30 years until it finally exploded in 1381, when the Peasants Revolt saw rebels march on London, burn the Savoy Palace, and kill the king's own chancellor. The revolt was crushed, but by around 1400, serfdom in England was effectively dead, replaced by freer forms of land tenure the old system would never have allowed. The plague reshaped culture just as thoroughly as it reshaped the economy. A severe shortage of skilled stonemasons pushed English cathedral building away from elaborate decorated stonework toward the simpler, faster perpendicular style you can still see in churches today. The collapse of French-speaking clergy and tutors accelerated the rise of English as a written literary language, helping open the door for writers like Geoffrey Chaucer a generation later. England rebuilt slowly, fields were replanted, churches found new priests, markets reopened, and children were born into a country with more land and more opportunity than their grandparents had ever known. But the generation that had actually lived through it never fully got their old certainty back, the quiet assumption that the world was stable, that the people around you would simply still be there tomorrow. They had watched the devout die beside the careless, buried loved ones without the rights their faith had promised them, and learned, in the space of 3 years, that survival was never really about virtue at all.